Hello, it's August 25th. I'm recording, and today I'm not going to add a new assignment because you're already working on something big. But I thought I would check in, make a video each day to stick with the routine, and cover some like tips and FAQ type stuff that I've seen when I've been looking at these outlines and first drafts. By the way, I'll continue to look at these. The number turned in is changing all the time because sometimes I comment on one, send it back, people send it back. Some of these I've seen before, some of these have been, when it says missing, it's not really missing because I've hit the return on a lot of them. But anyway, we're going to look at common things that I've been typing as advice or whatever. So, number one, there are, in general, two ways to write when you're doing your first draft, when you're transitioning away from the outline and into paragraphs. There's sort of two ways to put that into your story. And we call that scene versus summary. Okay, scene like SCENE, like a movie scene or a scene in a play, is when you zoom in and you say like, hey, we're in the room, we're watching something happen. We might stop and say what the character's thinking. If it's the old Western where it's like Clint Eastwood about to draw and like a tumbleweed goes by and everything slows down and we see the sweat going down somebody's eyebrow. That's a scene, we're really getting in there. And then the other way is summary, where you might gloss over a bunch of stuff. You might say like, oh, and then every day that summer I visited Grandma. But you don't show like in Grandma's kitchen, sitting on the thing, talking to her. You just say like, oh, this thing happened. And you kind of just say a quick version of it. Okay? It's fine to do both. It's not like one is bad. But if you have summary the whole way, that's kind of, it almost feels like it's not a story. I don't want to say that unequivocally because, of course, there could be a story doing that the whole way. This is art and we have our creative freedom. But most of the time, if you write summary the whole way and you just say like the kind of things that happen, but you never zoom in and give us a scene, then it feels like we're not reading the story yet. It feels like it's just an outline still, even if it's in paragraph form, So one thing I've been commenting on a lot of these is, hey, slow down. Get small. Get into, like, instead of just saying they had a fight, say like, oh, this guy looked and he saw the other guy's right arm move, so he knew he had to duck and counter with the left hook to the ribs. You can slow and get into it. Tell us what it sounded like. Tell us what it felt like. Tell us what the guy was thinking. Or even like bystanders, you could say like, oh, what somebody else was thinking when they saw this or something. I always think it's funny in a movie when there's action going on and they cut to like the cat watching from across the street or whatever, like that reaction shot. I always think that's great. And you can do stuff like that to really get into the moment and make us feel like we're there. So that's number one tip is summary's fine, but not the whole way. You want to get to a scene, especially the big moments, when the character makes a decision, get into a fight, have some romance, whatever. If something happens more than once, you can do the scene the first time and then summarize it later. You can be like, oh, here's the first time I, did this crime, and then you can say, well, I did that every day for a week, and then I got caught or something. My second tip is that you'll be adding dialogue to these stories. When you had your outline, you probably didn't have anything in quotes. You probably just summarized what the characters were doing. But in your first draft, you're going to be writing dialogue. And what I would say is that that works exactly the same as like your conflict escalation when we were talking about the story, The Use of Force, and how like the doctor said, "Oh, can you open your mouth? Can you let me see what's going on?" That was like a move in this chess match of what he was doing, and then the girl said nothing, and that was still a move. That was still a choice. That was still her turn. And then the guy leaned in, and he was like, "Oh, I don't have anything in my hands," and that was his action in that game, you know. So when you make dialogue, you can make it really just, "Hi, what's up?" Give us a way to introduce the characters' names because they can say their names out loud or whatever. But you can make it meaningful. You can make the dialogue actually carry some weight. And when people say stuff, it actually matters. Like, obvious examples would be stuff like, "You're fired." If somebody says the words "you're fired," then that's an action more than it's just, you know, flavor. But everything people say carries actions with it. So make sure when you're writing your dialogue, think of it like a game, like they're taking turns making moves, and sometimes you're trying to intimidate people, sometimes you're trying to get info out of them, sometimes you're trying to like reinforce your social position, you know, bully the weaker ones or whatever, and that often comes out in that way. Finally, the thing I'll say as our number 3 tip, and then I'll end this video before it gets too long. This is something I've said before, but I think it's really crucial, is that you don't have to have a villain, okay? You gotta have a conflict, otherwise it's not really a story, it's just some stuff lying around. But you don't have to have a villain, okay? You could have good people who clash, or you could have a person running into nature or law or their own fears or something like that. And you don't have to have a villain. So if you're thinking of conflict, you don't just have to make a mean guy show up and tell our character that he sucks or something. You want to think about, you know, why might there be competition for this thing we want? Or why might there be another very reasonable person who has a different goal? I've commented that on a couple stories about where somebody has a villain, and I think, oh, you know, would that make sense for somebody to be doing that? You don't just want them to sort of have a stereotypical evil guy, cartoony thing. In fact, none of the stories we've read have villains, and probably none of the ones we will. And that's fine. You don't have to have just the guy with the mustache and the goatee asking us to, you know, sign up with the devil or something. So those are my 3 things I wanted to mention, 3 things I've seen. Number 1, scene versus summary. Make sure you zoom in and give us those moments. Number 2, dialogue matters. It can be conflict. It can be characters really putting their motivations out there. And 3, you don't have to have a villain. You can have conflict in lots of ways that don't just involve the evil emperor sending minions at us. Thanks.